It's my pleasure now to introduce Mr. Michael Minogue, Chief Executive Officer, President, and Chairman of Abiomed, Inc., and also Board Chairman of MDIC. Mr. Minogue, as any of you know, is a tireless leader and advocate for everything he gets involved with. MDIC is no different. He was a founding member of MDIC, has been a great partner in building awareness for the ecosystem on the importance of investing in regulatory science to support patient access to safe, effective medical technologies. I would like to invite Mike to the stage now for questions and answers with Dr. Califf.
Thank you, Bill. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Commissioner.
Good morning.
My name is Michael Minogue, and I'm the Chairman and CEO of Abiomed. We are the maker of the world's smallest heart pumps that are designed to protect and recover heart muscle. And I have the honor today to have a discussion with our Commissioner. And in preparing for this discussion, I watched some of your old interviews that you used to do on famous people in cardiology. And I wanted to quote the way you started every interview, which was to interview people who have done great things in the space, and the goal was to provide insight into what makes them do what they do and what motivates them. So I'd like to continue with that goal today, and in our discussion have three sections. First on some personal, second on your clinical career, and then last on your current role as the Commissioner of the FDA, with your permission, of course.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
So first, if we could talk about, where did you grow up?
By the way, it's nice to be confirmed, because now I can
That's
say
right,
what
exactly.
I
I figured as much. So, where did you grow up, and would you tell us a little bit about your parents and their background as well?
I was born in Anderson, South Carolina, because my dad was teaching architecture at Clemson, and there's no hospital in Clemson. It's a college town, great place to grow up. My parents are from Low Country, South Carolina. My dad from Charleston. My mom's father was a Baptist minister in Low Country, South Carolina. If you can imagine what that was like. And amazingly, my parents are still alive. My dad's about to turn 94, and my mom is 88. She was a school teacher and very opinionated. She still gets on the internet and takes on people like Bernie Sanders when they're not nice to me. But and they are very intellectually involved. I think I'm lucky in the gene pool. It looks like they're still very intellectually involved in thinking about things, which has been great for me. I did learn one thing. I hadn't told my dad about this yet, but I ran into Rick Klausner at the airport, former head of the NCI, was a Dookie a year or two ahead of me. His dad just turned 96. Both of our dads were in the Battle of the Bulge, so we were talking about it. And he said, my dad just got his life insurance payment because the actuarials for World War II veterans peak out at 96. They didn't anticipate anyone would be left alive, so you actually get a payout when you hit 96. $5,000, it's not great.
Did your parents give you any advice when you were a child that helps you today in your current role?
I'd say my parents were very dedicated to the internal compass, to doing what's right, to being fair to people. A very, I would say, Southern Christian sort of background with a very liberal flavor. This has been in other interviews. I grew up in a place called Republican Hills in Columbia, South Carolina, eventually. And in the Kennedy-Nixon election, I still remember I was one of 13 out of, I think, 600 in the class that voted for Kennedy as opposed to Nixon. So they were, I've always been interested in politics, but I've seen them over the years do things that disadvantaged them financially because it was the right thing to do. And that was a real lesson for me. It's easier sometimes to do what comes easy.
So, Commissioner, when did you decide you wanted to pursue a career in medicine?
People had told me I should be a doctor since I was in high school, but I was rebellious against it. And what happened was, my college time was the time of Vietnam War. It's very tumultuous. I was focused on Eastern religion and psychology, actually, like a lot of people at that time were. And then my senior year, after working in the state pen in South Carolina for a couple of summers, I concluded I wanted to do something tangible. And so I had to go back and take all the science courses, take a year off, work as an orderly, and then start med school.
Were you doing research even on things when you were a child? Did you have that mindset?
I would say I was always interested in how things worked, but more so in statistics. I was a big baseball fan, and I used to, like a lot of more boys than girls at the time, I would keep all the stats of all the players and do the math. And so, yeah, I mean, basically, yeah.
Great. And who was your childhood hero?
Depended on the year that you were talking about, but early on it was Sandy Koufax, a famous baseball pitcher. I wanted to pitch like he did. And then, interestingly, I sort of went without a hero for a while because it was such a crazy time when I was in high school. But you know, I'd say my parents really ended up giving me the role model that was most influential.
I know in the past you've talked a little bit about your wife. Would you tell us how you've met her and explain how her training and career as a nurse has potentially influenced your opinion of that profession?
Yeah, Lydia and I went to the same high school, and we met in high school and have really been together ever since. 42 years of marriage. She's very smart. I mean, it's another interesting sign of the times. At the time, her parents didn't think girls should go to expensive universities. So even though she got into Duke like I did, she went to UNC Greensboro because her parents wouldn't pay for a girl to go there. But she's also very grounded in you know, basic life. She was an intensive care unit nurse, and you know, really understands what makes people tick. And I tend to be more conceptual. Can't find the milk in the refrigerator, all those kind of things. And she's constantly bringing me back to earth in everyday life.
And you were the captain of the basketball team in high school that won the state championship in South Carolina. So how did that experience affect you, and what did you learn from it?
Well, it was a huge experience. There's even all the things I've done with the FDA pale in comparison to the night that you win the state championship in basketball. You are the man at that, you know, for that brief period of time. But you know, basketball's a team sport. Yeah, I was captain mostly because I was a pretty good student, and there was a rule in South Carolina that coaches couldn't coach the team during the summers, and the captain would do all the, you know, sort of be the coach during that time, which was the role that I played. It's not that I was the best player, but you know, you learn about teamwork. And you know, now of course, a sort of a hero is Coach K, who I grew up with at Duke. And you know, he says it pretty simply, a way to think about basketball. You got 5 players on the court, and if you have 5 players on their own, it's like this. If they're playing together, it's like this. And you want the fist. You want the team playing together. It's a whole different thing. And this very much pertains to healthcare delivery, but it also pertains to the kind of work we do at the FDA.
If you could also explain, I'm sure you had a lot of opportunities for colleges. What was it about Duke that attracted you? And obviously you have been a devoted person to that school over the years.
Well, my older brother had gone to Duke, and I was pretty provincial. I'd actually never been on an airplane when I went to college. Also kind of strange thinking about my kids, you know, have been all over the world. And it seemed like a long ways away, but a good place for college with a mixture of all these people from all over the place. And it wasn't the basketball, because by then I'd already concluded I was too slow and couldn't jump. And there was no way I was going to play basketball there in that kind of competition. But I just had a great time. And I thought I would never go back. And I was surprised to get into medical school there. But once that had happened, I was sort of devoted to it. And it's given me tremendous opportunities. I think for someone who originally was provincial, Duke has had a special role in the South. It's been a way station. You know, it was a bunch of people came down from Hopkins to found the medical school. There were no specialists south of the Mason-Dixon line when they came, and you know, it's played a very special role in the history of the South. Still has a ways to go. Things going on in North Carolina today.
Great. So now we're going to transition a little bit to your clinical career, and maybe you could share with us one person who's been kind of a role model or a mentor to you that's positively impacted your career.
Gosh, there are a number, but I'll just quickly reel off a couple who were just great. I mean, Eugene Stead was the prototypical chair of medicine, and he was a role model because he trained like 40 chairs of medicine, but had this characteristic of always looking at the world orthogonally to everybody else. So most people thought he was crazy, but the people who really understood him realized that he was seeing the world from a different perspective. And so was, you know, in the 1960s, he decided computers were critical, quit his job as chair of medicine, and went into computerizing things in medicine, which that sounds very quaint now, doesn't it? But if you think to that time, a computer took up a whole room, and it just seemed insane to everybody else. One mentor, Galen Wagner, unfortunately just passed away a couple of months ago. And Galen taught me something in that he actually was crazy, and most of his ideas were wrong. In fact, I went like a decade where I would ask Galen what to do, and whatever he said, I did the opposite, and it worked great. But the thing about Galen was, you always knew his interest was in my doing well, not in his doing well. And you know, that's a lesson that a lot of people haven't learned. And then I'd point to Holly Smith, who was my chair of medicine. Our daughter had congenital heart disease when I was an intern, had a huge operation. Holly built UCSF into this powerhouse, you know, he and his colleagues, but he was really the leader. But he was just a genteel person who knew how to take care of people. At the same time, he was making really hard decisions in leadership. So those are the people that come to mind.
Could you describe for us the very first study that you owned and ran, as well as the first registry that you helped establish and set up?
Yeah, so the first study I did was as a third-year medical student. And at the time, Holter monitors had just been invented, another sort of quaint thing. And you know, what was happening in America at the time was people were dropping over dead from heart attacks at age 50 as a norm. Sudden death was a huge deal, and there was a view that PVCs would predict who was going to die of sudden death, and of course the treatment was going to be antiarrhythmic drugs. So I spent 6 months putting Holter monitors on everybody I could find who was going through the cath lab, and then the death rates were so high at the time, it only took a year of follow-up to have adequate power. And we did an observational regression analysis, and sure enough, PVCs predicted that there was a higher risk of sudden death. But when you put ejection fraction in the model, it completely eliminated PVCs as a risk factor. And so this was very upsetting to me because I wanted to be popular. And the dogma was it's PVC. So as an intern, I went to present the results, you know, and there's a statistician, Kerry Lee, who's also another role model. He's retiring this month, I think tragically for the field, but good for Kerry. He had helped me do the regression analysis and had me prepared to tell the truth. And I flew to Miami, got up at the Fontainebleau. There was a room full of people, gave my results, and they made fun of me. They said, this is the stupidest thing we ever heard of, because my conclusion was if you were going to treat sudden death to prevent it, you would look at ejection fraction, not PVCs. Well, guess what? Who gets defibrillators? So, you know, the real lesson there was be true to the data.
Right.
It's okay to have hypotheses, but you should be humble and realize that what you think is true often will not be true when you do the study. But Dr. Stead had started a database for people, which is what I actually based that study on. It was a registry of people going through the cath lab. That, as you know, morphed into a number of registries and ended up being sort of the evolution of that. It was a Duke database, but versions of it became the basis for the ACC AHA registries and the STS registry, which, you know, has been a huge part of many of our careers.
So you've had a major impact on the field, and there's a lot of physicians today that are coming up through their fellows and residents program. What advice would you give to them today in starting their career?
Yeah, I've got a son who's an intern in emergency medicine. I keep asking him if he wants to be a real doctor. That really makes him mad. But he's doing what I would advise, which is he's following his heart for what he really wants to do. He just had a publication, I couldn't believe it, for the Journal of Wilderness Medicine, of he and his two buddies in South America scaling a 14,000-foot cliff on the side of a rock mountain with just ropes. And that was a medical publication. So he's following his heart and even publishing, doing it. But I think the key is doing what you love to do and doing the best job you can. Realize you're serving patients when you're in medicine, and always keep that at the forefront. You know, those things are easy to say. It's hard to do it on a daily basis with all the pressures that you have. But to me, it's really pretty much that simple. When I've seen people in medicine who are doing things they don't like to do, often they can actually make a lot of money even, and still you can tell it when they're not happy, and I don't think they do as good a job when that's the case.
So speaking of serving, when did you decide you wanted to serve your country by serving as a regulator in the FDA?
Well, let's be fair about this. I will accept the accolade of serving the country, and it is true you get attacked every day and all that kind of stuff, and take a big hit in pay. But I think anyone who's done it will tell you it's so much fun and so interesting. Even if I didn't want to serve, it would be something that you do just because it's, you know, an amazing thing to do. But you know, I'd done so much work with the FDA in my previous work. I had been interviewed formally once, and you know, asked about interest at another time in other administrations. So it was not a new concept. And you know, the time was just right, because some of the things I talked about in my lecture were these big projects like PCORNet and the NIH Collaboratory, which is where I thought medicine was headed and needed to go, but they had gotten to the point where I knew they were going to succeed. It was also obvious there were young people who could probably do it better than I could at that point. So it was a good time to go to a different venue, and as you can see, it's actually been a place for me to work to synthesize a lot of the things that I think are important. So
was there one moment or something that happened that was a bit of an epiphany that this is what you wanted to do?
Well, Peggy Hamburg called me up and basically said, I'm getting ready to call it quits. It's been 6.5 years, and you know, she also said, I think you would be a good person to be the next commissioner, but to be the next commissioner, the president has to offer you the job and Congress has to confirm you, so there's no guarantee. And you know, it's another place where Duke has just been really good to me, because as many people know, I'm on leave of absence from a professorship there, and it was possible to do that. Duke has sort of an unwritten rule that you can, if you do high office in government. David Price is, I think, 23 years, still a tenured professor at Duke, because he's a congressperson. So you have a home to go back to, which is reassuring, because I'm looking at 18 weeks, and then we got a new president, and you know, don't know what's going to happen.
That's right. So maybe now we can switch to your current role as the commissioner, and what motivates you in this role?
What motivates me is the full realization that you're serving an entire country, and that you're surrounded by amazingly driven people who get, you know, little reward other than the personal satisfaction of doing a good thing, which is, as I say, I don't want to downplay that. It's not like you're beaten into submission and you're just doing it because of some sense of duty. It is exciting to do what you do at the FDA. But, you know, I'm fortunate in that my kids are grown up. Lydia's as supportive as she can be. She does remind me every once in a while that I shouldn't work all the time. But it's not work to me, because you're involved in things that really make a difference. And the system is set up so that intellectually things are served up to you in a way that you can really think about them which is just a fantastic experience. People at the FDA, it's just amazing when I got nominated by the president, it's like the whole FDA comes together and says, okay, we got this idiot that's been nominated. What do we have to teach him so that he can get through a confirmation hearing? And to just see the way the information is put together and brought to something where you can advise and help make a decision is phenomenal.
You talked about that technology changes and people don't. If you were to say there's one component that you'd like to see people change and that you've learned in the role, what would it be?
Oh man, that's a tough one. What I'd say is that this balance of bringing in flexibility in your thinking with staying true to principles. I think everyone, almost everyone I know tries to do that. But at a time when things are changing and there are all these pressures and things happen, money has gotten an outsized, proportionality, I think, in our society for the way decisions are made. And so, how to maintain the core values and yet be adaptable to the changes that need to occur. I think that's probably the essence of it. I see people all the time, they're comfortable doing what they're doing. The world is changing, then how do you change while maintaining that core and not succumbing to pressure to do the wrong thing?
Commissioner, you were very instrumental in the success of Citi and on the pharma side helping to advance research. I think MDIC and the FDA has really moved the ball forward on medical devices. How do you see the combination products coming about over the next 3 to 5 years, and what happens when you have products that have regulations and reviewers in different departments within the FDA?
Definitely on my mind right now. I had just a blast yesterday. They let me go to a panel meeting. Dr. Shuren actually gave me permission to sit on the panel, and it was on the issue of wound care products where, as a former ICU director, I've really just felt like we don't have the evidence that we need. We have over 700 combination wound care products on the market and a lot of amazing technologies developing, and it's an ecosystem. It's not purely an FDA issue, it's an ecosystem issue of how we do things that allow us to know which are effective and which are not. So we've been, the 3 medical product center directors have all agreed that the FDA of the future has to have more of a medical products orientation instead of pure drug device and biologics. There's a combination products council that we've developed, and we're working out the kinks. And I think there will always be a primary, in a matrix, there'll always be a primary dimension of the type of product because of what you have to know about how devices work, how biologics work, and how drugs work. But at the clinical level of assessing do the benefits outweigh the risks, what we're hearing loudly from the patients, especially in cancer, but I think all patients would feel the same way, is they're interested in technologies that help them with the minimization of harm, regardless of the type of product. And so we really need to integrate by discipline across these areas. And combination products are a good way to do it because you've got to integrate to make it work.
One example of, I think, a successful alignment over the last couple of years has been the percutaneous valves and the coordination between the FDA, the medical community, and CMS. Are there other opportunities where MDIC can be more influential working with CMS, which is part of MDIC, but to advance these type of tools?
Yes. So, I got to tell you, one of the great thrills for me has been the ability to work directly with other agency heads. So I'd heard rumors that federal agencies had trouble working together, and there may be some history in that regard, but Francis Collins and Andy Slavitt and I have what we call a trilateral meeting once a month, and we found really, really tremendous synergies. And I point out 2 areas that are really critical now where I think MDIC can play an important role. The first is this whole thing about evidence. If you think about it, what you really need to write a good product label is exactly what CMS needs to assign value. Now, FDA decision making doesn't take price into account, and it shouldn't. But increasingly, because of all the pressure, and it's the right thing to do, CMS is going to have to use value to decide upon reimbursement. We're moving that direction. I think 30% of CMS payments now are not traditional fee-for-service, and it's ramping up. And I think both political parties, in different ways, see value as the way to go. And so what's in between us is a gap of evidence right now where having a continuous registry with randomization when it's useful would be a very efficient way to get the information that we both need. For FDA, for the life cycle of the product, for risks and benefits, and for CMS to decide what should be paid for. Then the other area that's dear to my heart is early device development. And I think CMS and FDA both have an interest in making the best technology available to Americans early. We've got to solve the problem of these mega centers we have in the US who have all the expertise, but right now are having trouble getting themselves to sign the contracts because of legal risk if things go wrong. And so, we're beginning to bring the device industry back to the US. And I think you all could play a key role in helping to make that happen. And then, I can't talk about this without, pointing out again, I think the trickiness here is, in the end, while we're in an ecosystem and we need to be partners in many ways, we have to understand how to keep it true that the FDA makes decisions independently of influences by the ecosystem. And that is just really, I'll just say, it's easier to avoid the influences if you're not interacting. So I think this is something we've all got to work on, because if people begin to feel that decisions can be influenced by friendships or other things that happen, then we've got an unfair playing field, and we've got to be very sensitive to that as we do it.
Great. What else is out there beyond the Coordinating Center for the MDIC? And I would compliment Dr. Jeff Shuren for his leadership in helping establish it and also getting us to where we are today. But what are the next big ideas you think we should focus on?
Well, of course, given my history, I see everything is deriving from a data system. And once you've got that, then I just think you add knowledge pieces onto it. If we look at where things are going, you mentioned combination products, but we're going to see these amazing combinations. If you had a biological treatment given, you'd like to have some self-monitoring capability, because living tissues inside of you that's going to continue to change, and so there are devices that will do that. And I really think the key is to have an ecosystem where quality systems and self-governance are built in. There's transparency, which leads to much self-policing, and competition helping that. I mean, one thing you do see at the FDA is some of the best informants on bad behavior by industry or other people in industry, right, who see it as unfair for competitive purposes. But the FDA is still going to have that independent ability to step in when things aren't right and do something about it, when the evidence dictates it, to pull things back. But to me, the ideal world would be where the data is transparent enough, where we're all looking at the same data. The FDA just needs to be the unbiased referee in the game, which sort of gets back to my origins. I've always enjoyed keeping stats and refereeing, and our goal ought to be the best outcomes for the patients in a competitive playing field. But setting the playing field where the data are not, owning the data is not the way to win the game, but using the data, contributing your technology so to things that can be measured ought to be the way to win the game. I think that's the future. And watch the president and vice president in this space over the next couple of months. I love it when the president uses the term data landlord to describe people who hoard data. And for the vice president, if you had a glioblastoma like his son did, the last thing you'd want would be cancer centers holding onto their data and not sharing it, so that we don't answer the critical questions.
2 last questions. What can companies, big and small, do to prepare for NEST?
I think the number one thing, big and small companies, is to get your mindset in place to optimize contribution of data, but also be able to use the data. And number 2, I guess right up there with it, is be very active participants. I think, I mean, I'll just say the FDA thrives with positive criticism. I hate negative criticism, but positive criticism is good. But I think positive participation, because none of us, this is a new era. I still remember in our coronary care unit, the first thing we did with our computers is we took the written notes from the doctors, and at the time a word processor really didn't exist in common use. So some of you remember the typewriters with the whiteout. But we just took the word processor function of a computer and typed the notes. And there was an uprising by the cardiologists because they claimed that the computer was messing up their notes and that they weren't accurate anymore. It was verbatim exactly what they had scribbled on paper. And I think now we're in this hyper world where the compelling force is going to be better and better information. And that should help small companies, for example, move much more quickly, because the resources you should need for product development should come down. But it also means you're going to have to accept that your data is going to be looked at. You won't be able to hide it,
right,
which is critical.
So last question, what has been the greatest one insight you've had since becoming commissioner?
I'd say it's a two-sided insight that if you create an opportunity, I think this is true around the world, but I'll just speak specifically about Americans, an opportunity to be innovative. Almost everyone will try to do the right thing, and if you create the right environment of competition and cooperation, you can really make it soon. There are always going to be maybe 2 or 3% of people who try to take advantage of the system in an unfair way. And so as we think about human nature and regulation and innovation, the key is to create systems where the people doing the right thing win,
right,
if their ideas are good, and the people doing the wrong thing, or the people doing the right thing whose ideas don't work, don't win. And that's the challenge in front of us, I think. But it should be an easier challenge if the data are transparent.
Great. Well, your father may have told you this quote as a preacher, but in the Bible it says, where there is no vision, the people perish. So thank you for your time today, and thank you for your vision, and thank Dr. Shern for his vision as well for MDIC. Appreciate it. Thank you.